we get you back into court, we have a quick update out of another case in Nevada. A judge there rejected a request to release defendant Dwayne Keefe D. Davis out on bond earlier today. This decision came after Davis's attorney said he would provide financial records to prove that he was not planning on profiting from the sale of Davis's life story and that the money was legally obtained. But the judge told the court today that she had a sense that things are trying to be covered up before rejecting his request for bond. Davis was arrested, as you may recall, in September of last year and charged with murder in connection with rapper Tupac Shakur's 1996 death. The trial of Davis is scheduled for November 4th of this year. Now let's get back to the preliminary hearing for the defendant Corey Richens out of Utah. The mother of three is facing a list of charges, including murder, for the death of her husband, Eric Richens. Prosecutors say that Eric was poisoned by a cocktail laced with a lethal dose of fentanyl back in March of 2022. Let's go back into the courtroom now. More of the hearing. Again, it's the defense arguing right now as to count 2, attempted murder, saying there was no causation to connect this defendant to that crime.
Returning back to, well, actually, they've introduced that exhibit that they blew up that showed that she was on her way to the house, and that's from her home. Okay. So she was at home. So there's a period of time where she's at home between 9:15 and 9:41 a.m. with eggs to eat. Now, it is a fair assumption that when you bring eggs home, you eat them quickly. So it is perfectly possible, and just as inferential, that she could have had breakfast with her husband that morning together. And let me tell you why I believe that that's proven in the state's own case. Because at no point in any conversations, any texts between Corey and Eric, does he ever tell her that he's feeling sick until he tells her at 11:40 something that if I'm still feeling this bad, I'm going to go to the hospital. So it sounds very much that they've already discussed that he doesn't feel well, right? So it is perfectly consistent with Corey Richens' statement to her friend that they ate breakfast together. Which would make it pretty hard to poison someone when they're sitting there and you're handing them their food and watching you hand them their food. So then you have Eric between 10:21 and 12:06, and these are reflected in exhibit number 38, which shows the locations of calls made by Eric.
Could you pause for a second?
Yes.
Is there a statement that they ate breakfast together?
They just talked about her telling her friend lying that they were together when they ate.
So, I just want to make sure I'm not missing anything that you're seeing. Quote, forgive me, folks. I didn't even make him a fucking sandwich, those fucking idiots. It was Valentine's Day, and Eric and I both were working from home that day, and I ordered lunch from Mirror Lake Diner.
Well, that was months later, and she hadn't seen the time. She hadn't been exposed to any of the
Hey, folks, I need you to take a deep breath. Is there any evidence that she has a backward-looking statement saying, I ordered breakfast?
Well, that's the only statement that we're aware of.
Okay.
But at that point, she hadn't seen the time. So she's remembering if it was breakfast, lunch, whatever. I mean, that was months later.
Right.
But she admits she got it at Mirror Lake. She admits they ate it together. She mixed up the time of breakfast and lunch. I mean, there's no debate that she was not there at lunchtime. That didn't happen. So, so that's clearly a mistake. So she leaves the house at 9:41 and is gone for the rest of the day. Eric drives to multiple other locations after she leaves.
Do we know, help me out, do we know that? Or
Yes.
was he doing the estimating from home? This was unclear to me from the testimony.
So in the Celebrate exhibit that is Eric's phone, it shows where he's making calls from.
Okay.
And so he makes calls from, I think he goes to it looks like the Smith's grocery store, the Walmart. He goes and runs some errands. He's making business calls ever since Corey left, the whole time. After he's eaten the egg sandwich, he's driving around, he's making calls. Then he texts Corey at 11:20 7 and talks to her about some soccer fees that the boys owe, and then says a few minutes later, so between 11:27, he's talking about soccer, and 11:33, so he hasn't seen Corey now in 2 hours, he says, I'm gonna go lay down. If I don't feel better, I may go to the hospital.
Right.
And I must respectfully point out that when the prosecution talked about her saying, go take a nap, and how that was chilling, he pulled that completely out of context of the rest of what she said in that text.
Do you need me to come home?
Would you like me to come home? Jesus, is that bad? You know, she even at one point later in the day talks about, he says, I wish you were here, and she's like, I would cuddle you. So that is very misleading to pull that statement out, and I need to correct that for the record. But regardless now, he hasn't been in her presence for 2 hours. If he ate that sandwich, he ate it around 9:30, give or take, at the latest. So in that period of time, he's been running errands, doing business calls, texting Corey, very benign, normal day-to-day texts, nothing about I'm about to die, nothing like that. He takes a nap for 2 hours, then he gets up.
Is still with us, federal trial attorney Alexis Rosenberg. Alexis, we know this is a preliminary hearing. Probable cause is the standard. Any evidence at all. It's a way different standard than beyond a reasonable doubt up here versus probable cause, one of the lowest standards of proof. And it's hard to really say or prove to a court there's no evidence, Judge. The defense, I think, is making good argument based in fact, but is it enough?
I mean, the defense is doing the best job, but like you said, it's a really low standard. I mean, just to put in perspective, I think that the listeners have heard probable cause, like probable cause to stop a car, probable cause for arrest. So it's a very, very, very low standard. And she really is trying to do her best to say, we have these questions with this timeline. I mean, listening to this, I do have questions, but like you said, this isn't a trial. So we will see. I mean, I think there is a question of, causation, as well as, was there a history of drug use with the husband? At this point, we don't know.
And if there is a question, generally that means a judge has to send it to a jury so that the jury, as the trier of fact, can decide what they believe to be true based on the evidence. We know there are 9 charges against this defendant. Are you surprised that they're choosing to have a preliminary hearing on each of those charges to try to say, listen, a lot of the defendants will waive it and say, we're going to waive the preliminary hearing, we're going to go straight to trial?
I'm not so surprised, but I don't think that her attorney is believing she's going to win this. I think it might be more of an educational purpose to get it out there. It's being televised. Maybe, she wants TV time. I don't know. But like you said, most of the time it's waived. It really is a low standard. I mean, in this state, as she mentioned, they don't have grand juries. Even with the grand jury, it's kind of difficult. Most grand juries statistically will find that it can go forward.
Yeah, and the other thing it does do for the defense, it gives them a free look at evidence, so to speak. They get to hear what some of the testimony is, and that can be very beneficial in then planning the defense for a defendant. All right, stay with us. We need to squeeze in a quick break. When we come back, of course, we'll bring you lots more here on Court TV, your front row seat to justice.